Hi, bitch besties. It's your main bitch, Melly. Thank you so much for tuning in and welcome to another episode of the Judgy Bitch Pod. Hi, bitch besties. Before we start this episode, I just want to give out a quick trigger warning. We're going to talk about abuse in this episode and narcissism and everything related to that. So please listen mindfully and please take care of yourself while listening. Thank you so much. Hello, bitch besties. Welcome to another episode of the Judgy Bitch Pod. I am super excited. I know I said this every week, but I actually mean it. I'm so excited for this episode because I have Lauren back on from the Self-Esteem Counselor. I love her so much. You guys gave me so much positive feedback about our last episode about self-esteem. You guys learned so much. So did I. I actually took notes. Not kidding. So I wanted to do an episode about narcissism for the longest time, and I couldn't figure out who to do it with, who can explain it best. And I mean, you guys know it. Lauren can just explain it in a way that it makes total sense and is understandable. So welcome back to the Judgy Bitch Pod, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me again. I had so much fun last time, and I am thrilled to be here.
I'm so thrilled to have you. And thank you so much for agreeing to coming back on. I've actually reached out to you and asked you if you know somebody I can do this with, because I didn't even dare to ask you if you wanted to do it again. And you were like, I can. I love that.
Well, there's a talking about self-esteem. There's a connection with talking about this topic. So,
That makes total sense. And I love so much that you agreed to it, because as I said, you just explain it in a way that is so understandable and makes so much sense. So I'm really, really excited to have you back on for this topic.
oh, that means a lot. Thank you so much.
And especially this topic, because I feel like the word narcissist or narcissism is thrown around so easily. And, everybody who is somewhat toxic, people just say, oh, he's a narcissist or she's a narcissist. We don't discriminate on this podcast. We just simplify. So can you explain in simple terms what is actual narcissism?
Yes, well, I love what you just brought up. I love how we are talking more about mental health and terms that include behavior and talking about mental health. But what can happen sometimes is that it can become an absolute, and the word can get way more normalized, but then it can be used in ways that it was never meant to be, or just overused in a way, like you were saying, like labeling all toxic people as narcissistic, and that's just not true. So the best way I could describe like what narcissism is, and there's a few ways of how, again, we have probably seen it around, but narcissism is just a pattern of regulating fragile self. It's a fragile self-esteem. This person has a fragile self-esteem, and they're using defense instead of secure self-worth. So last time we talked about having a secure self-worth, self-esteem, what that looks like. The person that has narcissistic traits is not someone who typically has a high self-regard or a balanced self-regard.
That makes sense. And is there a difference between narcissistic traits and narcissistic personality disorder? Because both
Oh,
terms are being thrown
yes.
around a lot.
Yes. So anybody can have narcissistic traits or narcissistic moments. But what's the difference between someone who has some narcissistic patterns versus clinical narcissism? There's a lot of differences. So
Mhm.
typically what narcissism is, you know, again, it's not excessive self-love, but it's difficulty maintaining stable self-love is what narcissism is. So it can also, talking about the spectrum of self-esteem, like we talked about last time, that there's unhelpful humility, self-defeating humility, and a self-defeating pride. Narcissism can go along that entire spectrum. Could go on the self-defeating humility side and the self-defeating pride side. And so that could surprise some people, but it doesn't mean that every part of that spectrum has someone that's narcissistic on it. So it's more so with someone who is narcissistic or having narcissistic patterns, is that it really, the core is a shame sensitivity. They can't really, they have a hard time focusing and facing their shame. And so it really, all of their behaviors and the ways that they see the world come from that. But what's different with narcissistic traits versus narcissistic personality disorder, and also too, I do have to say this, obviously being a clinician, there are other diagnoses and personality disorders that include narcissistic traits. So it can be very confusing. And there's different types of narcissism, like I was saying on that spectrum, which can also be confusing to someone. But in general, if we're going to talk in general, narcissistic traits, again, are behaviors that can appear situationally. There's flexibility to them, right? They're not all the time. When we see narcissistic personality disorder, it's a pervasive personality structure that impacts relationships, work, identity. It's going to impact multiple areas of someone's life. It's not just, this one instance or a few instances that come up. It's, oh my goodness, this is impacting someone's entire life structure. So I hope that gives a good idea of what the difference is between the two.
Definitely. And that builds a good framework for our episode today because we're going to
Hmm.
dive a little deeper, of course. But I want to just
Yeah.
mention for the bitch besties who are just listening this episode, there's another episode Lauren and I did on self-esteem where Lauren explains
Hmm.
everything she just mentioned. But I also want to point out Lauren's TikTok at the self-esteemed counselor because Lauren has great videos, excuse me, on explaining all of those vocabularies and
Hmm.
schemata she just explained. So I just want to point you in that direction as well. But going back to the narcissism, is it a myth that narcissistic people or people that show narcissistic traits in that moment, are they evil or toxic people?
That's a very general statement. And that, again, we would have to look at what toxicity is, and what I would think you are implying by that is that are all people that are narcissistic harmful? Is that kind of what you're asking?
It appears sometimes like that.
Yeah, it's really challenging to connect with someone who has narcissistic characteristics and patterns because, again, they're protecting themselves. Their identity is not intact. They don't know who they are. And so a lot of people can explain narcissistic people to be kind of like shapeshifters because they will be wherever the environment calls them to be and where they're going to get their needs met. And so because they have this avoidance to shame, it's hard for them to be authentic. It's hard for them to have humility because it's like, I can't go there. Because if I go there, what's going to say about myself? What does that mean about me? Where when you really look at shame, like, shame is, I like to say all emotions are helpful, but shame is one that is saying that you are bad, that you inherently are a bad person. Like that is a really challenging place to start from. And if you view yourself that way, what does that mean? So that's very scary for someone with narcissism because most people know that they're not all bad, that
Yeah.
they might have made a mistake or they may have done something. So when that level of fear is involved, like you'll never get to know that person fully. You'll
Mhm.
never get to know the narcissistic person. That's why it's so confusing to have any type of like you're try to have a conversation or if you're trying to bring up a need, it kind of goes back on you. And you're like, well, that's not how I thought the conversation was going to go. So it's not necessarily all people who are narcissistic are toxic or dangerous. If anything, it's just they can be. That would almost go down the line. Are all narcissistic people abusive? But no, that's not true. That is not true.
Gotcha. From my experience, and once again, I don't know nothing, right? I'm not a professional
Hmm.
in the mental health field, but from my experience with having dealt with what I believe were narcissistic people,
Hmm.
they can be very manipulative. And
Hmm.
it's almost like you can't win in any kind of situation when dealing with a narcissist because they
Hmm.
manipulate you and turn it back towards you. They're very good at deflecting and,
Hmm.
playing the victim role almost a little bit, and you're always the bad guy in the equation. Is
Hmm.
is that how you can recognize when you're dealing with a narcissist, or is this complete myth?
That's a great point. So when we talk about manipulative behaviors, again, we all can be, every one of us can have manipulative behaviors to get our needs met. So we all can use manipulation. But what you're explaining specifically is it's a pattern. Again, it's a
Mhm.
pattern of being manipulative, of taking information from another person and saying, how can I make this benefit and work for me? It's really sometimes very challenging and difficult to notice in the beginning because typically a lot of times a narcissist is going to know. Again, I said that they a lot of times can be shape shifters, and so they can be different in different circumstances to not only get their needs met, but also for them to manipulate you. So if they think, oh, I have this person, they like me, whatever, well then Oh, so if a narcissist notices that you like tolerate a lot or are willing to tolerate, are very, very kind and generous, well, they're going to use that to their advantage.
Mm.
At that point, it doesn't become about caring about the other person. It becomes, how can I get my needs met, or how can I use this information for my benefit? So it seems in the beginning like they care about me, or oh, they're asking me really good questions. And then you'll see there's that manipulative behavior of like, wait a second, like they're using this now against me days later, years later, whatever. And it's like,
Mhm.
that's not what I intended this for. So with, again, with narcissistic abuse, yes, manipulation is a huge tactic, and it can be used again with someone who has narcissistic tendencies.
Interesting. And since you just mentioned it, do you believe that, speaking of the extreme, probably, that narcissistic people in a relationship, for example, when you just start dating, do they like get you with love bombing at the beginning and showing you the highest possibility, and then over time start showing their true colors and the manipulation sets in a little bit, and you as the victim, I'm just going to call it the victim for lack of a better word
Yeah.
right now, you're clinging on to those highs that you experienced and you want those back
Hmm.
so badly, and that's why you stick around a little bit?
Hmm.
Is that something you experience too from patients and people you talk with?
Oh, and I mean, and that is just a classic narcissistic abusive dynamic right there is the love bombing. It's something to be very, to pay attention to. Chemistry is something that is sometimes used in the very beginning. We have so much chemistry, lots of praise. I want to marry you. Everything
Mhm.
about you is amazing. So yeah, love bombing is a huge way, a tactic. And then, the receiving person, the victim or the survivor, is, whoa, like I've never been spoken to this way. I've never gotten, this is all I wanted, is someone to take care of me. And, and it slowly erodes. And you start noticing what happens in, like, if we start talking about narcissistic abuse, what you start noticing, you have this gut feeling of, well, that was weird. I just shared my emotion with someone, and I just said a need, real quick need, and now they're not talking to me for 5 days.
Mhm.
And they are looking at me like they want to harm me. Like, what? Like, you start noticing things like, well, then maybe it was my fault. Maybe I did say something. And then you start apologizing.
Yeah.
And so that's a definite dynamic of narcissistic abuse right there. That big over the top love bombing, and then it starts to dwindle down.
Yeah. And since you mentioned it, I'm single, so any non-narcissistic guys, please slide on my DMs. But since we're talking about this, are there any like red flags we can look out for to avoid, dealing with the wrong people in that sense?
Yeah. Again, like I said, no one intentionally enters into a narcissistic abusive relationship. Nobody ever does that. And a lot of times people don't understand it, especially that have never experienced it, because it is very confusing. And a lot of times the person that joins up with another person that's not narcissistic is typically more of a have people pleasing tendencies, or are very genuine, are very intelligent, smart people. And so what happens is that the narcissistic person, it latches on to that person. Oh, I like this. I like their energy. And what kind of starts to happen, not to sound, so, harsh about it, but they start like almost sucking that person dry is really what happens. I want that. I want that confidence. I want that type of intelligence. I want to have this energy. And it almost becomes that in their mind like a threat. Well, this person's a threat to me now.
Mm.
And the other person is confused because it's like, well, you said all these things about me. What are you talking about? So, like, even also too, just real quick, even after in a relationship, the love bombing can still be present, but it's it becomes intermittent.
Yeah.
And that's where the trauma bond kind of is already solidified, and that's where it comes, where it's like, oh, we have these really good moments, or it's like, I'm sorry, baby, I didn't mean to do that, and you're so wonderful, you're my world, I couldn't imagine my life without you. And then it turns into, again, you say one thing, and then it's, oh my gosh, like you would have thought I said the worst thing imaginable, and I just was asking for something, or, now I'm getting berated about something. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. But in the beginning of a relationship, obviously, like for anybody, take it slow.
Yeah.
Take it slow. Okay. The other person, narcissistic person, is going to want to take it fast. Okay. Is going to want
Mhm.
to be like, well, what are we waiting for? I already know I want you. I'm telling you all these things. And typically over the top, but you take it, and not to say, not every narcissist, like there are some people that are not narcissistic that will say wonderful things to you in the beginning because your hormones are you're trying to bond together in that beginning, you know? And so there are some of those things. So it's like, hold up, let me take my time. Always ask yourself too, like, what do I like about this person? If you can't identify anything, that's a big sign. Like, probably not a good idea. If it's based off of feeling like, huh, I don't know, I like how this feels. I would be very wary of that. Go with characteristic traits that you notice. Go with things that are consistent, stable. Are their words aligning with their actions? Is what you're looking for. Okay, they're not talking a big game or they're not just a smooth talker. They are actually doing what they said they're going to do. They're consistent. They might, when they say they're going to be there, they're going to be there. So those are some really big things to look out for when you begin dating someone, is just kind of going back and being like, okay, also asking yourself, do I feel safe? Do I feel safe right now? Do I feel like I can be myself, say my emotions, and it's not offensive to the other person, or they give me room to talk about my emotions? That's another thing to look for too.
That's really great advice. Thank you so much. And once again, I will have
Mhm.
to listen back and take notes. Do we know where narcissism stems from? Is this something from childhood? Is it genetics? Do we know that?
A lot of times it comes from childhood. It
Mhm.
comes from early attachment environments where emotional needs were not consistently met. There's a lot of inconsistency there. So then it's hard for that person or that child to have that core self or that core identity. So they're
Mhm.
missing that part. So experiences of conditional love, neglect, enmeshment, excessive pressure to perform, that can be environments where narcissism can thrive. So again, like, you do this for me, I will get you this, or we'll have some nice time together. So yeah, a lot of chronic, excuse me, conditional stuff. But then chronic shame, emotional invalidation, like, I can't believe you did this. I'm so disappointed in you. A lack of, attuned caregiving. So just really not being paid attention to, just a lot of the kids not being, a priority to the family environment. So yeah, a lot of times too, just like anything, it becomes a coping strategy.
Mhm.
Narcissism becomes a strategy to survive. So a lot of times children or, experiences don't, come out of nowhere. They're a survival strategy, just like anybody else. So it's not necessarily it comes from like a character flaw, but it just a lot of times is out of environment, repetitive environment.
That makes sense. You always explain
Hmm.
it so well. That makes total sense.
Oh, thank you.
And we said they can be like really good manipulators. And is that also
Mhm.
something that they then learn in their childhood over time and just develop that skill of manipulating really well? Or is that instinctive?
So, like what I said before, everybody can be manipulative to get their
Yeah.
needs met. If someone is not getting their needs met, they will use manipulation to get their needs met. Like, so for example, if someone wants to be left alone, that's not being left alone, they will what? Probably become silent and stubborn.
Hmm.
That's what it'll appear. So if you keep bothering me, guess what? You get a stone wall. That's a form of manipulation. Even like we, talked about a little bit more on our last episode, we talked about that we did together, we talked about people pleasing behaviors. People pleasing
Hmm.
is a form of manipulation because
Yeah.
it's like, well, if you like me, then everything's going to be okay. There's a form of control there, right? And
Hmm.
so again, with the narcissistic person though, and the form of manipulation, it really is about getting their needs met. But a lot of times it's done in a way it's confusing a lot of times because there's other things playing, like, going to be a component there, like gaslighting, emotional invalidation, like I kind of mentioned before, of if you go to the person and say how you're feeling and it's like, that doesn't matter, you're being too sensitive, things like that. So the manipulation really, again, is a form of their control, how they get control.
And you just mentioned the gaslighting. I was just going to ask you if
Mhm.
gaslighting is another method they like to use or to get their needs met, I guess. What's their goal?
Yeah, a lot of times, like, they want to get their needs, like, definitely to get their needs met, because if again, it's a form of control. If
Hmm.
they're telling you, oh, I'm telling you what you experienced, right? then they don't have to focus on themselves. There's no looking at themselves and being vulnerable. And it then goes, okay, this is the problem. That's why a lot of times after someone gets out of a narcissistic relationship or abusive relationship, the narcissist a lot of times defames the other person, talks very badly about the other person because it's like, how dare they do that? Because they just cannot get to the core or the bottom of that shame, of their authenticity. It's very challenging for them to be vulnerable. So the gaslighting is, yeah, of course, it's going to meet their needs somehow because it's like, if I could tell you what's going on in your world, well, I still have the power. I still have control. And as long as I have that, then I'll be okay.
Can they ever be happy? Do they ever get to their goal?
That's a great question. I think a lot of times there's delusional aspect to that of, or maybe even a emotional bypassing of I don't know, because they're living in a world that really works for them. I think they believe they truly are happy. I think there's a component to it until somewhat things just go awry. Maybe they mess up their lives so much that they finally come to a place of being like, oh my gosh, I've messed up my life so much. I have to now focus on myself. But I think to a part of it, not all, I can't generalize all narcissists, but
Yeah.
I think to some component there's a delusional aspect because they're really not, they don't know who they are. They lie so well, they believe their own lies.
Hmm.
So imagine if they're saying they're happy, then they're happy, but they're really not happy.
And for the other side, the victim, survivor, or whoever has to deal with a narcissist, can they ever be happy? Is there a secret weapon to deal with a narcissist and to have a actual relationship where you're not the victim?
Like, another great question. So obviously lots of boundaries. That person needs a lot of boundaries. I don't know if you've ever heard of the rock method, but it's basically in general terms, you would just not share anything with the narcissistic person. If they are an abusive person and there is narcissistic abuse, there really is no way to have a healthy relationship. It's just, I have to be as blunt as possible. There's not, because it will always go back in that cycle and there will always be that opportunity for abuse. They don't know they're not seeing the other person as a whole person. They don't have compassion towards that person many times, or they're just so caught up in their own stuff. It's very hard for them to have compassion for the other person. So if you in regards me to like happiness versus healing, like, I think that the survivor or the victim can definitely get out of a relationship and be very happy, or to have, again, there's going to be, the relationship's going to be very much with a lot of boundaries are going to be involved. You know, if they could learn how to validate your experience, but if anything, it's going to be you that has to validate your own experience
Mhm.
because the other person's going to make you question it. I think I mentioned in the last episode too, Dr. Ingrid Clayton wrote a wonderful memoir called Believing Me. And I just recently listened to a podcast with her on it, and she still has a hard time believing her own story after she experienced a childhood of narcissistic abuse
Mhm.
because it's very, wait, did I make too big of a deal out of this? Like, did this really happen? Because the gaslighting is so confusing. So yes, I think, there's hope for both, but a lot less with the narcissist. I don't know if you've ever heard of Dr. Ramani, but she's probably like the expert in this field.
Mhm.
She has a wonderful podcast, a long-standing podcast, and fabulous resources and books. And she really goes down the line to identify all the different types of narcissism to really help. She really helps focus, like her podcast focuses only on the survivor, only on the victim, because she has seen in her practice and her being a therapist for many, many years that it's exhausting to work with a narcissist
Yeah.
because it's so hard for them to face their own shame and to be vulnerable. It's exhausting. It gets to a point where it may be for a little bit, but then they keep on going back to their old patterns because, again, it feels safe to them. It works for them. Where the victim, the survivor, there's a lot of hope for them because they're like, oh gosh, I'll do whatever I can
Yeah.
to ensure that I never enter into this again or never fall for this again and that I feel safe and secure. So the best thing that a survivor can do is to believe themselves, to start trusting themselves, to have relationships. I call them corrective experiences, to allow themselves, it's going to be scary in the beginning, but to have relationships that are like, wow, that go against, not everybody's a narcissist.
Yeah.
Not everybody is going to abuse you narcissistically, and to say, wow, these corrective experiences are allowing me then to be safe in my own body as well. Like I said, again, having boundaries, but listening to those boundaries. And when you listen to yourself and listen to when you feel like you're not safe and you go through with it, again, you're building that trust with yourself of like, okay, I can spot if somebody is unhealthy or unsafe or behaving, you know, in a way that's narcissistic or narcissistic abuse.
Yeah, it sounds like a long healing journey for a survivor, depending, of
Hmm.
course, how bad it was. I mean, it's a spectrum, you
Yep.
mentioned it earlier. Is
Yeah.
there a sort of healing for the narcissist himself? If somebody now recognizes I might be a narcissist, and once again, it's a
Mhm.
spectrum, but do they even recognize that or admit that to themselves? I heard there's a myth out there when you ask yourself if you're a narcissist, you're not a narcissist. So that implies that if you're a narcissist, you wouldn't ask yourself if you were one. Is there some sort of healing or therapy you can do to be better?
Yeah, again, a great question. A lot of times you're right. I think a lot, if you're recognized like, oh my gosh, I noticed that I have these characteristics, or a lot of times a narcissist will tell the one that is not a narcissist that they're such a narcissist, and then they start believing that they're a narcissist and they're not a narcissist. So, but yeah, I always say that there's always hope. I have witnessed myself people recognizing that they're narcissistic. They can identify that and know that. But like again, what Dr. Ramani says, every time that a narcissist really digs deep and gets the therapy, they might go for a little bit of time, or they might go for a while. That might be more performative as well. There's a lot of performing done
Mm.
for a narcissist. Like, look, I did it. I went to therapy, but you're looking for real lasting change. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but gosh, I go with the expert on this one, Dr. Ramani, who's done it for like, so many years. And she has seen that it continually goes back to those patterns of not really getting to know themselves very well and heal in that way. But I don't want to say it's not possible because like you were saying before, I don't want to discriminate. It's just kind of, we're being realistic here.
Yeah.
So if someone has like narcissistic traits, heck yeah, they can go to therapy, and really get the healing that they need to identify those things. But if someone is more like has narcissistic personality disorder, we start getting to, borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, we start going down those areas. It really gets really, it's more of a long road for that person.
Yeah. Very difficult. I hear that. Can you call out a narcissist on their behavior, or will they always respond with gaslighting and manipulation and, deflect from them to you?
I would ask a question then, back to you, then what would be the purpose in calling out the narcissist? Because what do you think is going to happen?
Ah, okay, that's a good question too. Reverse right there.
Right? What is your point? Because if you have tried to confront the narcissist or try to hold them accountable,
Hmm.
a lot of times you're going to see them weave their way out of it and put it back on you. Or again, if it's performative, if they're like, you know what, you're right, you're looking for words to align with actions. So you can call them out and identify it. I think, again, it's the way you do it. Like, hey, I'm just noticing if it's in a loving manner, hey, I'm noticing some narcissistic tendencies. But again, it's not our job to fix people either. It is always the own person's responsibility to want to do it, to
Yeah.
to say, okay, I'm going to go to therapy and I'm going to, work on this as best as I can. And please know, I have seen narcissistic people do that, have said, hey, I really want to do this, but there's a difference between wanting and actually doing too. So that's where I think the divide is. A
Yeah.
lot of narcissistic people can say that, wow, I'm a narcissist and I need to get help, or I don't want to be this way. I don't want to have relationships like this. But then again, going back to saying and doing are completely two different things. As I said before, it's very tricky. A narcissist believes their own lies.
Mm.
So it's they lie to themselves. So it's very hard to trust someone who's narcissistic.
Yeah. So that almost sounds like there's basically no reasoning with a narcissist, right? You cannot expect them to see your side of the story and even have empathy with you. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's very hard again, that's where the rock method comes in of, hey, I'm not going to give you any, I call bait. I'm not going to give you bait to take anything. I'm not going to tell you about my inner world because you will use that somehow, some way against me and not as a moment to connect with me. You'll use it for your control, not to, again, have a relationship with me.
Yeah. And So when I start dating and I notice somebody may have narcissistic traits, I'm just going to run for the hills. I learned that now. But do you have advice on what to do when it's a family member? Like, if you don't want to cut them off completely, is there like a middle ground where you don't lose yourself and jump into that victim role so you can somehow keep them at an arm's length? Maybe it's to keep the family peace. Do you have advice for that?
It's so hard when you recognize that you have a family member, whether it's a parent, whether it's a family member like a sibling, it's very challenging. And there's a lot of beliefs about family, like, oh, you never abandon your family, you don't leave. So there could be a lot of manipulation and control tactics used in a family dynamic. But when we really talk about narcissism, excuse me, and a family dynamic, the same rules apply. And so it's very much they will, you're putting yourself at risk to be manipulated and abused. If they will abuse one person, it's very likely if they don't have that person anymore in their life, well, they're going to use the next person that's closest to them to abuse them.
Hmm.
So boundaries are very helpful. A lot of boundaries of, again, like what you get to determine what you share with someone. Again, it's a risk. Everything in life is a risk, really. But to engage with a family member that's a narcissist, again, they're doing everything for themselves. It's not for the other person. It's not really coming from a genuinely caring place. So again, it's going to look a lot like relationships with a narcissist outside of a family of not sharing those things the rock method as well.
Yeah. And when you say sharing, do you mean just not giving away your, private business so they don't have anything to use against you? Is that what you're referring to?
Oh yeah. Yep. So even if they ask you questions like, tell me more about your day, I really want to connect with you and know what's going on in your world. So it seems like, oh my gosh, like they're changing, like they really want to know. And then you tell them, and then they use that information of like, oh, well, now I know how they'll use it in language to make you feel bad
Hmm.
next time around. Well, you said this, and do you not mean that? And that's very hurtful that you would say that. Why would you say that about me if you didn't mean it? And so then that pulls on the heartstrings of the other person, like, oh, well, maybe I did say something that was not cool, and maybe I do need to apologize.
Hmm.
And then you're like, well, this is really weird because all I just was asking was for some extra time with this person and for their attention, and
Yeah.
now it's turning into this weird thing that like I feel like I'm in trouble.
Yeah. That makes sense. And from my personal experience is the longer this relationship lasts and the more manipulative they're working on you, the
Mm-hmm.
smaller you kind of feel and get. And you're so wrapped up in this relationship, it's so hard to pick yourself back up and leave. But also
Hmm.
from the outside perspective, like if you see your best friend is dealing with something like that, how can you
Hmm.
support them? Because sometimes they don't even realize they're being manipulated. Should
Hmm.
you say something to help? Do they need to figure it out on their own? Do you have advice for that kind of situation?
It's a very tricky situation, like you just said. A lot of times the victim has no idea they're in it. They know something's wrong, but there's a part of them that doesn't know what to do. And so if you could identify, I think sometimes the most helpful thing, especially if the person has no idea, is identifying what you're experiencing is abusive and you don't have to tolerate it. Because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times the victim feels like I have to tolerate this. I've already tolerated for this long. And if I do this, well, they already said that I'm going to be abandoning them. So then, like, I'm abandoning them. That makes me a bad person, right? And it's like, so I think, as a friend, it's a very, very tricky spot because it's not your relationship, but you also want to help your friend. So you can identify things and then obviously, it's really a hard place because you never want to tell your friend what they have to do. You want to give them a voice, So a lot of times, again, going back to what they're not receiving, making sure that you're validating them, making sure you are spending time with them and validating their experience and giving them a space to talk. I think one of the most helpful things is having at least like a friend or someone a therapist that you can go to and be like, this is happening to me, but I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get out of this. Like, do I stay or do I go? That actually is a book by Dr. Ramani, and she talks about it. Like if you're struggling in a narcissistic relationship and you're like, do I stay or do I go? She wrote a fabulous book that talks about do I stay or do I go? Like, what do I do in this
Mm-hmm.
situation? Because it really is up to the victim. Obviously, if there's, things that, their safety, like they start telling you more about their safety, it's like, okay, we got to figure out, like, you're telling me things that are very concerning. Is there a way to help you? But the thing is, you don't want them to, a lot of times they'll kind of shut you out too, because they're like, oh no, I told you too much and I don't want you to have a bad, so now I'm not going to tell you anything bad about, my partner or this person because I don't want you to have a bad view of them or anything like that. So you don't want that to happen, but you're just trying to walk alongside them and support them and listen to them, however much they'll share with you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then once you or your friend or whoever gets out of this relationship, what would you suggest to them or recommend to build themselves back up and maybe to learn a lesson from the past relationship? Is there anything you would highly recommend?
If the person gets out of the relationship, or do you mean like how can the friend help support the person that gets out of that relationship?
The person that gets out of the relationship.
Again, uh, definitely going to a trauma informed therapist for sure.
Hmm.
Because most likely, if someone was in a narcissistic abusive relationship, they have definitely experienced symptoms of complex post-traumatic stress disorder or some form of post-traumatic stress disorder. Many times, a lot of times, narcissistic people will betray their partner over and over and over again. And it's okay for them to do it, but it's not okay for their other partner to do it. So there could be a lot of betrayal recovery or betrayal trauma that someone experiences as well. So yeah, so definitely getting with a trauma-informed specialist to get a specialist or a therapist so they could get their nervous system's going to be out of whack. Their self-esteem is going to be way out of whack. They're going to feel lost. A lot of times the person feels lifeless that or hopeless that
Yeah.
gets out of that relationship and they don't know where to turn. They don't know how to believe themselves. Goes to how can I, you know, trust is built with little steps of consistency.
Hmm.
So if the person can go back, find out, remember who they are, or find out more about themselves and then do the things that they say, start taking care of themselves. Yeah, so they're looking to a lot of those things, but rebuild that self-trust, validate their experience. Yes, this did happen to me. I was abused. That doesn't define who I am, but what I experienced was not okay. Believing their own story, establishing, I think, boundaries just in general, having boundaries, knowing what they need and want. I think that's another thing as well. Like, well, we talked about that with self-esteem, but like, yeah, figure out what you like, whether it's food related, whether it's art related, whether it's how you move your body related, figuring out what you like and then being confident in that, like, this is what I like. Surrounding yourself with people that are very supportive, healthy, loving. Again, validate your experience and your emotions is always very, very helpful as well.
Wow, I feel very seen by everything you just said. Wow, thank you. As I
Mhm.
said, you were just explaining it perfectly. And it was actually a
Thank you.
question of mine to ask if you can get PTSD or even see complex PTSD from it. And you just answered it. That is very
Mhm.
validating for me. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
But taking another step back, when you are still in a relationship with a narcissist,
Mhm.
it is my experience, but maybe it's also other personality traits that you can get very much cornered by that person, emotionally cornered, with words cornered. I mean, they're just very on top of you to manipulate you or to get to reveal something if
Mhm.
that they then can use against you again from your personal life or whatever. Is there anything that shuts down a narcissist? Is there, it doesn't help to tell them stop doing what you're doing, so is there anything you can do in situations like that?
Ending the conversation or not having, like, literally, again, like not telling them anything, not responding back to them, not giving them the attention, because once they know that they can't use you, then they're not going to use you.
Mhm.
They're going to go elsewhere to find, unfortunately, their next victim. Again, I always I always have a hard, I don't know if it's because I'm a therapist or what, but I always have a hard time. I don't want to villainize the narcissist, but I want to be realistic
Mhm.
of that, because again, I said there is hope for a narcissist if they want to get the help. And again, they will need therapy too. Their therapy is going to look different than what I just explained about the survivor. It's going to be more long-term attachment focused therapy, like EFT, emotionally focused therapy, or even psychodynamic therapy, which really focuses on their past
Mhm.
and their childhood experiences. But, it's the less information you give. So it's really disconnecting. I'm not going to share anything with you because that they can't do anything with that. Okay, well then I can't I can't attach myself to you and suck you dry, like I said before.
Yeah. So it's almost like an emotional detachment. That's the only thing that really helps.
And physical, but emotional detachment for sure.
Yeah. And once again, we're talking about a spectrum. We're probably talking about an extreme case
Hmm.
here right now. But
Hmm.
when you set these kind of boundaries and you're emotionally and if you can physically detach yourself from your narcissistic partner, would they then see that as a challenge and, get even harder onto you? Or will they back off once they realize you're setting boundaries there?
Oh, that depends. That's case to case. That depends
Hmm.
on the type of narcissism we're dealing with, because there are, like, again, Dr. Ramani lists several different types of narcissism. So again, it makes it more confusing, and it also, I think, it depends actually on each person. Some might leave you alone, and some might, like, not take no for an answer, because again, that's maybe you were all they had. They felt like that you were all they had to get their needs met. Sometimes this doesn't happen all the time with every narcissist, but if that case happens, a lot of times they will say that they're going to harm themselves or possibly, do something not great to themselves, and that's a form of manipulation too, excuse me, as well. So
Hmm.
it's, there's certain cases that you just don't know when you do, but typically that's the best case scenario that you could do, is just detach from the person emotionally. Now, abuse is real, and
Yeah.
a victim is more at risk when they leave a relationship. It is unfortunate, and that's why a lot of victims have a hard time whether knowing to leave or to stay, because it is a real threat, and they're not unwise for knowing that or thinking, gosh, what happens if I do leave? Will I get harmed more? There is such a thing as
Yeah.
uh, post separation abuse. So.
But since you're mentioning it, how do you know whether you're trauma bonded or really in love?
Mhm. A trauma bond is an addiction. It's like an addiction. It is fixed or relies on dopamine. So it feels like you cannot leave. So for the victim, it feels like they cannot leave. There are good moments. Anybody that you
Mhm.
probably talk to that has been in a narcissistic abusive relationship will say, well, it wasn't all bad. Like, there were some really good things, and I was attracted to them or whatever. But then you realize, wait, this is not love. Like, it shouldn't be like one day, my gosh, this was the worst meal I ever had. And like, and
Yeah.
throw it in the sink and cause this big, to do. And then the next day being like, baby, you want to go on a date? You want to like hang out with me? It's like, there's something off with that,
Mhm.
to 1 minute be all lovey-dovey, and then the next, be critical, manipulative, gaslighting, emotionally invalidating, like all those
Yeah.
things. It's like, whoa, and so what happens with the person who's in the trauma bond, it's very much, well, I know it's going to come back. I know that he's going to be nice to me eventually. He's going to have to be, or she's going to have to be nice to me eventually. Like, it's going
Yeah.
to have to happen, and so I think with that case of the trauma bond, that's what it looks like. It's very up and down, up and down. Now, when
Mhm.
we talk about what real stable love looks like, there's not that big fluctuation.
Mhm.
There's a stability there. It's not no relationship is perfect, and for anybody to think that there's this perfect relationship, but you are looking for, again, the key word, stability,
Yeah.
emotional stability. When you go and you say, hey, I don't like how you said that to me, and the person comes back with, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, what happened? That's what you're looking for, not, oh my gosh, you're imagining things. I didn't say anything. You're so sensitive.
Mhm. Yeah.
How dare you say that to me? That is so hurtful. Why would you even bring that up? Okay, what's the difference there, right? You can clearly see the difference between the two there. The person's not going to be, oh my gosh, like, what are you doing? That didn't happen. You're saying the story all wrong. Like, oh my gosh, other than, gosh, it's so funny. I think I saw the story different, but it's okay. You know what? That's when we're two different people and then we see things
Yeah.
differently sometimes. So I hope those are two good examples of that's the difference. It's very stable.
Yeah. Those are great examples. And also, as we said at the top of the episode, that love bombing is a method they're using. And from my personal experience, at the beginning of the relationship, they show you the highs, like it's almost like the potential, what love could look like. but you never
Mm-hmm.
get back to that high. In my personal experience,
Mm-hmm.
it only goes downhill from there. Although there is highs in between those many lows, as you say, it goes up and
Mm-hmm.
down, but it's never the
Mm-hmm.
highest high as the love bombing at the beginning of the
Mm-hmm.
relationship was. My personal experience, right? What do you recommend to somebody like a bitch bestie out there listening to us now? And now they recognize, shoot, I think my relationship is definitely the one they're talking about. They didn't
Mm-hmm.
realize until now. And now all of a sudden, the lights go on. What would you recommend to them if they wanted to get out, how to start the process? Because, it can get
Mm-hmm.
dangerous sometimes, depending on the person, of course. And once again, it's a spectrum. We're talking about an extreme here right now. What would your advice
Yeah,
be?
I would again. So sometimes there's some narcissistic abusive relationships where there's coercive control, where the person may not allow the partner to get therapy
Mm-hmm.
or have wonderful friends. So they might start pulling in on those resources financially too. There could, when we talk about narcissistic abuse, there could be financial abuse, religious abuse, all these different types of abusive behaviors that happen. And so if that's the case, it makes it a little bit more challenging, but really trying to have a safe person that's they can talk to is really helpful. So if that's an option, but I totally understand if that's not an option for some cases. I think as well, there are domestic abuse shelters that are around and organizations that are around that can help someone to get to do it safely
Mm-hmm.
and to have a lot of anonymity with the process because you're really trying to protect yourself and someone else, especially if you have kids, what I mean by someone else or family members, friends, you're trying to protect other people while you're trying to do this. But having a trusted friend or therapist to guide you through it is very, very helpful. But at the end of the day, if they are by themselves, they really might have to just write and remind themselves, start believing their story, write it down, remind themselves, write statements down to remind themselves, like, what I'm experiencing is not okay. And I need to do this for my own mental health to start at least building up their own self-esteem again. It's like I don't, but it's really hard to build your self-esteem when you're in the dynamic. When you're in that dynamic, it's very challenging to see yourself. You're just trying to survive and make sure that you're as safe as possible and surviving and thriving and trying to encourage yourself. They're not the same. But if you can have at least one person that you can speak to and talk to, because at least they will validate your experience and be like, this is not okay. This is abusive. We have to help you get out of this too. But the goal is then not to create a lot of fear with the other person of like, this is too much for me. Because their nervous system is dysregulated. So there's a lot of anxiousness going on.
And I appreciate that you earlier in the episode showed a little bit of the other person's perspective. I really
Mhm.
appreciated that. So if there's people now after this episode recognizing I might have a lot of narcissistic traits, if they even
Mhm.
are able to recognize that, but let's say they do, what would you recommend to them?
Again, I would, if they would be open to going to a therapist, typically a client-centered therapist is not going to force you to talk about things you don't want to go to, and they can tell if you're having a really challenging time with vulnerability. But going to a therapist, that deals with, like I said, attachment based, knows a lot about like EFT or attachment focused therapy, psychodynamic therapy, finding a psychodynamic therapist is very, very helpful as well. And then, again, trying to find themselves and connect with themselves and not have that shame,
Mm-hmm.
to be like, hey, I'm not all bad. Yes, have I done things that are hurtful? Yes, but that doesn't identify who I am. And it really is a repetitive pattern over and over again. So with any pattern, if you're looking for it to be broken or to change, again, we need consistency.
Yeah.
Research shows that it could take hundreds of times to correct a certain belief. And so it just could be a lot of corrective experiences, behaviors, things like that of saying, okay, this is not all about me, or I feel like I am trying to be someone I'm not. Why am I trying to be so performative right now? But again, it goes with like they need self-awareness too, and they have to. This is with anybody with any type of change or therapy or anything.
Yeah.
There can't be that resistance. Like there has to be a willingness of like, okay, whatever comes my way, I'm going to do my best to be humble, vulnerable, open to other ideas and figure this out.
And you said it earlier, and I want you to say it louder for the people in the back. We cannot change other people.
No, we cannot. They're outside of our circle of control. So anything outside of our circle of control is something that we have an opportunity to accept. So, again, with someone who is narcissistic, even though it's so sad, it's like, oh, why can't you be the person you said you were in the beginning? Like,
Yeah.
if you were just that person, this could be fine.
Mm.
But that's living in a dream world.
Yeah.
That's not possible. So it's like they are who they are. What's helpful for the other person and to help accept the other person is really just to say, you know, they're just being who they are and who they've always been. So I'll just say like some name, like Bob's just being Bob, and Bob doesn't know who else to be but Bob.
Right.
That's a phrase you can say to keep them outside of your circle of control. But I can focus on me, who I am, and building relationships with people. It's sad. It can always be sad to not have that relationship, anymore and think of what could be. But again, that's dreaming in a dream world and just saying, okay, what's reality though? It had to happen. It had to end because there was no way out.
Exactly. And as we said in this episode, there's a lot of love bombing at the beginning, especially,
Mm.
and that just isn't real. Although we want that type of relationship, but it's just not real, right?
It's not real. You're looking for words to align with actions.
Exactly.
Words to align with actions, not a lot of smooth talk, a lot of big talk. You don't want any of that. You need it to align.
Yeah. What would you say is the biggest misconception about narcissism or narcissists?
Well, that's a great question. That they're all toxic, like you were saying before,
Yeah.
because they're not all toxic, not all narcissists. And like there are narcissists who can change. It is just, it's more challenging for them. And then also, is there a way to have a relationship with a narcissistic person? Like, again, with a lot of narcissistic patterns, most likely no.
Yeah. Very interesting. Before we move into the games, if we still have 2 minutes at the end of this, I have some
Mhm.
quick fire wrap up questions for you. Just quick
Okay,
ones.
sure.
So, one sentence. How do you spot a narcissist fast?
Well, that's a good one. Fast.
Or, like in general, how do you spot a narcissist?
They don't take responsibility.
That's a good one.
They blame everybody else. They don't take responsibility.
That's a very good answer. What's the most overlooked red flag?
Mhm. I'm going to say hypersensitivity
Hmm.
or any type of vulnerable covert narcissism, I feel like is overlooked because a lot of people, they will do a lot of victim identifying. So, oh my gosh, can you believe this person did this to me? So then you start feeling bad for them. I feel like that's very overlooked in narcissism because we typically think of the grandiose narcissism of someone who's entitled, has a lot of superiority, is dominant, and we sometimes forget about the person who is more victim minded. I'd also say another one who is more a communal narcissist is one that their self-worth is organized around being helpful, moral, or self-sacrificing. So that can be very confusing. And another one that was a long answer to a really short question, but it can be confusing. So both of those I think are ones that are not what's typical when you think of a narcissist.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. I don't mind if it's long or short. I don't care.
Okay, all right.
And the next one, I think we said it before, but it can't hurt to repeat that. What's the most empowering thing someone can do after leaving a narcissistic relationship?
Believing their story, believing what they've been through, saying that, yes, I went through that, but it doesn't identify me and I still am me. And there's a lot of empowerment with that, of just doing the things that are meaningful to them. So if they have always loved music or dancing, that's another way. Actually, that happens a lot with people who recover from narcissistic abuse is they get very connected to any type of artistic expression. So I highly recommend that. And so anything that feels right, go in that direction.
Here I am, Judgy Bitch Pod. Lauren, I want to thank you so much. Once again, you just explain it in a way that is just so understandable. I really love that. But I don't want to let you go quite yet because my favorite part
Okay.
of the episode is playing games with you. So the first game is called This or That, and you
Okay.
pick one and just give a short explanation to it.
Of which one I would choose?
Yeah, just pick one of both and give a short explanation
Okay.
what it is.
Okay. All right,
Okay.
okay.
So the first one is laugh bombing or slow emotional withdrawal.
Both stink. I guess if I had to choose one, oh gosh, I guess love bombing because then I'd be able to identify it faster.
Yes. And next one is grandiosity or deep insecurity.
Well, they both grandiosity is a form of deep insecurity. So I guess I would go with deep insecurity because at least it's not as domineering as grandiosity.
Okay. Charm or control.
Control because at least I can again spot control faster than I can spot charm. Charm can be deceptive.
That's a very good point. Next one is gaslighting or silent treatment.
Gosh, I don't like either. These are hard. Okay, I'm gonna go with silent treatment because at least I don't have to hear that my reality is not true.
Mm-hmm. Can also be very frustrating, though, silent treatment.
It's very, they both are awful.
Yes. Next one is needing admiration or needing power.
Again, I don't like either, but if I had to choose one, admiration. Again, I could easily praise someone. I think power sometimes can be a scary thing to allow or give someone.
Yeah. And maybe the last one for this game is public confidence or private shame.
I mean, again, they're very, you wouldn't think it, but they're very closely related. But I'm gonna go with private shame because then, the other form is almost like trying, again, performative, trying to fool other people. But if they're dealing with their shame in their own home, they're in their own home.
Yeah.
Hopefully not with other people to hurt.
Yes. All right. Last game is called red flag or run. Especially good advice for me is starting dating if I start dating ever again. So the first one, so you choose between red flag or run.
Okay, gotcha.
The red flag, maybe proceed with carefully, and the other one is a hard no, right?
Yep.
So first one is laugh bombing in week 1.
Run,
Never apologizing, only explaining.
run,
Making you feel confused after every argument.
run,
Being amazing in public, dismissive in private.
run,
Turning your feelings into a joke.
red flag,
Saying you're too sensitive repeatedly.
red flag.
Interesting. Okay, and the very last one I have for you is one sentence. What's the most important thing people need to remember when dealing with a narcissist?
What they say about you is not about you. It's about themselves and their fragile self-esteem.
Wow, big words. Thank you so much, Lauren. You explained it amazingly. I can just repeat myself. Please tell my bitch besties one more time where they can find you on TikTok. And I highly, highly recommend it, not just for the silly dances, but especially for the explanations you give on your TikTok. And also, if somebody wants to book your services, where can they find you?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. So I am on both TikTok and Instagram as the self-esteemed ED counselor. And then I also have my own practice on Instagram, a page which is called Esteemed Counseling Center. It all connects together. And then they can message me on any one of my social media platforms, and then I can get them connected to me via email and to connect to my services.
I love that. And I didn't mean to say silly dances. I actually really envy your dancing. And I should probably take it up too and start dancing a little bit to shake it all off, like Taylor Swift said.
Yes, like I said, dancing really does it. It lowers cortisol levels and it increases endorphins. It's one of life's best benefits.
And you're really good at it. Did you do this in your past?
I grew up doing it. I had a little stint of being a professional dancer
Interesting.
for a little bit, but I loved it. Dance is something that's always been a part of me. Talk about a connective experience, like dance for me is that experience.
I love it. Thank you so much. Bitch
Yeah.
besties, go follow Lauren, the self-esteemed counselor, on TikTok and Instagram and everywhere. Please give us your feedback. If you want to share some personal stories, please DM me. I'm always open to it. And I just love this episode, Lauren. I want to thank you so much for coming on and for explaining it in such an easy and understandable way. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, thank you again for having me. Please have any time. I'll come on here. I always have a great time.
I'll take you up on that. Thank you. Bitch besties, thank you so much for listening or watching. Give us your feedback and we'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye. Thanks, Bitch Besties, for listening. Make sure to follow us at the Judgy Bitch Pod. And hey, spread the word. Tell your friends, your ex, your dog walker. We'd love the support. Want to be part of the show? DM us your feedback, hot takes, or unapologetic opinions. We just might read them on air. And don't forget to follow, rate, and review the pod. See you next week. Cheers, bitches.